the Dreaming Blight. It started with the dreams. In the beginning, they were fleeting, a sense of being somewhere vast and dark, where the ground rippled underfoot and the air hummed with a faint, sickly green light. I couldn't make out much, only vague impressions of tendrils twisting in impossible patterns and whispers threading through the silence. "You see it?" The words weren't spoken so much as felt, vibrating through my chest like a pulse. I would wake drenched in sweat, my room quiet except for my own ragged breathing. I told myself they were just nightmares, stress-induced hallucinations, but deep down I knew better. The first real sign came 3 days later. I was brushing my teeth, half asleep, when I noticed it, a faint green thread running along the edge of the mirror. It was so thin I thought it was a trick of the light, a reflection of something outside the bathroom window. But when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't a reflection at all. It was inside the glass, curling and branching like a vein. I stared at it, my toothbrush hanging from my hand. The vein pulsed faintly, in rhythm with the same hum I'd heard in my dreams. "You see it?" the voice whispered again, though I was wide awake now, and over the next few days the green threads began to spread. They crept along the walls of my apartment, faint at first, but growing bolder, brighter. I scrubbed at them, tried to paint over them, but they wouldn't go away. I started noticing other things too, reflections that didn't match reality, objects that shifted position when I wasn't looking, faint whispers that grew louder the quieter the room became. And then came the visions. It happened at night. I'd been trying to sleep, though my mind wouldn't stop racing, and the hum of the veins had grown louder, more insistent. When I closed my eyes, I was somewhere else. I stood on a vast expanse of black, rippling like liquid but solid under my feet. The sky above was a swirling void, its edges tinged with faint green light. Tendrils curled and writhed in the distance, their movements slow and deliberate. And then I saw it. A massive, shifting form loomed on the horizon, its edges undefined, its body pulsing with sickly green veins that radiated corruption. Its tendrils reached out in all directions, threading through the void like roots in soil. "Do you see it now?" the voice asked, low and resonant. "Do you see what I offer?" The figure didn't speak, but I felt its presence pressing against my mind. It wasn't just vast. It was alive, aware, and watching me. I woke with a start, my heart pounding, the hum in my room louder than ever. The green veins were everywhere now, running along the walls, the floor, even my skin. They pulsed faintly, glowing in the dark, and I couldn't tell where they ended, and I began. "You see it?" the voice whispered again, louder this time, "and soon they will too." I stared at the veins, the hum vibrating through my bones, and realized the truth. The dreams weren't just in my head. Something was breaking through, and I was at the center of it. I woke to the sound of my own breathing, sharp and ragged. The dream had been worse this time, longer, more vivid. The green light still burned in my mind, and I could feel the faint pulse of the veins beneath my skin, as if they were alive. My apartment felt wrong. The hum was louder, not just a vibration in the air, but a presence. It was everywhere, in the walls, the floor, the spaces between objects. The veins had spread. They traced jagged lines along the ceiling, curling into intricate patterns that almost looked deliberate. They pulsed faintly in the dim light, the rhythm matching my heartbeat. "It's growing," the voice whispered. "You're growing." I wasn't sure how long I'd been sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the veins on my arms when the knock came. It was slow, deliberate, each sound echoing in the silence. I opened the door to find my neighbour, Mrs. Connors, standing in the hallway. She was usually chatty, the kind of person who would talk your ear off about her cat or her garden, but now she stood motionless, her eyes glassy. "Mrs. Connors," I said, my voice trembling. She tilted her head just slightly and smiled. It wasn't the warm, familiar smile I'd seen 100 times before. It was wrong. Too wide, too sharp, like her face didn't quite know how to move. "Do you hear it?" she asked. Her voice was distant, layered, as though someone else was speaking with her. My chest tightened. "Hear what?" She took a step closer, her movements stiff and unnatural. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's coming." I slammed the door and locked it, my hands shaking. I sat on the floor, my back pressed against the door, trying to calm my racing heart. My phone buzzed on the counter, the screen lighting up with a text from a friend. "You okay? Weird stuff happening here too. Call me." Weird stuff. That was putting it lightly. The hum in the room grew louder, and the light from the veins on the walls pulsed in time with it. I stared at them, watching as they began to shift, forming shapes, patterns that were almost recognizable. For a moment I thought I saw a face in the lines, its eyes glowing faintly green. "You see it!" the voice said again, louder this time, almost a command. I clutched my head, my thoughts unraveling under the weight of the sound. The room seemed to ripple, the walls bending like liquid. Objects shifted, their edges blurring. "It's growing! You're growing!" When the world finally settled, I grabbed my phone and dialed the only person who might believe me. My friend Darren answered on the second ring. "Jade, what's going on?" "I don't know," I said, my voice breaking. "There's something... I don't know what it is, but it's spreading. My apartment, my neighbours, it's everywhere." "Slow down," Darren said, his tone cautious. "You're not making sense." "What's spreading?" I looked at the veins on the wall, their glow casting faint shadows that seemed to move on their own. "I don't know how to explain it. There's this corruption. It's green and it's alive and..." My voice caught as I saw the veins ripple, the shapes shifting again. This time they formed a hand, its fingers stretching toward me. "Jade, are you there?" Darren's voice snapped me back. "Yeah," I said quickly. "I'm here. I need help. The hum grew louder, drowning out his response. My phone screen flickered, static crawling across it like tendrils. The call dropped. The dreams came again that night, more vivid than ever before. I stood on the same rippling black expanse, the ground shifting like liquid beneath my feet. Tendrils writhed in the distance, stretching toward a vast, pulsating figure that dominated the horizon. Its form was impossible to define, shadowy and serpentine, yet constantly shifting, leaking green light from cracks in its surface. "You are becoming," the voice said, resonating deep in my chest. The tendrils moved closer, curling around me like vines. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as the corruption seeped into my skin, threading through my veins. "Don't fight it," the voice whispered softer now. "You will understand soon." I woke gasping, clutching my arms where the veins glowed faintly beneath the surface of my skin. The next morning, the world outside looked different. The green veins had begun spreading beyond my apartment, curling along the edges of buildings and stretching into the cracks in the pavement. People walked by without noticing, their faces blank, their movements mechanical. I watched as a man stopped in the middle of the street, his head tilting unnaturally. His body stiffened and then he turned, his eyes glowing faintly green. He stared directly at me, a smile stretching across his face that didn't belong. I shut the blinds and backed away from the window, my heart pounding. I called Darren again, desperate for anyone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. He arrived an hour later, his face pale but determined. the hell is going on?" he asked as he stepped inside, his eyes scanning the glowing veins running along the walls. "I don't know," I said, my voice shaking. "It started with dreams, then this stuff started spreading. And the people..." "People?" Darren cut me off, his tone sharp. I nodded. "They're changing. It's like they're not themselves anymore." Darren ran a hand through his hair, his expression tight. "You're not the only one seeing this. A friend of mine across town said their neighbours started acting strange too, like they were hearing things." "The hum," I said instinctively. He froze. "What?" I gestured at the veins on the wall. "It's not just the light, there's a sound, a hum. Can't you hear it?" Darren frowned, shaking his head. "I don't hear anything." I stared at him, the weight of the realization pressing against my chest. Whatever this was, it was in me now. Part of me. We were in the middle of trying to block the veins with duct tape, an act of pure desperation, when it happened. A scream echoed from the hallway outside my apartment, high-pitched and raw. Darren and I froze, the tape falling from his hands. "Stay here," he said, moving toward the door. "Like hell I will," I shot back, grabbing a knife from the counter and following him. We stepped into the hallway, where Mrs. Connors was standing, her back to us. She was trembling, her body jerking in sharp, unnatural movements. "Mrs. Connors?" Darren said cautiously. She turned slowly and my stomach lurched. Her skin was laced with green veins, glowing faintly, and her eyes were blank orbs of the same sickly light. Her mouth stretched into that same too-wide smile. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice layered, almost inhuman. And then she screamed again, her body twisting and contorting as her limbs elongated, her fingers stretching into claw-like tendrils. The glow in her veins intensified, her form breaking apart and reforming in ways that defied logic. "Darren! Run!" I shouted, grabbing his arm and pulling him back into the apartment. I didn't expect to sleep after what happened to Mrs. Connors. The sound of her body twisting, the green veins spreading across her skin. It replayed in my mind every time I closed my eyes, but exhaustion pulled me under eventually, and when it did, the dreams came again. This time, the rippling black expanse stretched farther, and the tendrils were closer. They moved in slow, deliberate waves, pulsating with green light that spilled into the darkness. I tried to move, but my feet sank into the shifting ground, holding me in place. "You see now," the voice said, resonating deep in my chest. "The veil frays, and through its cracks we grow." The figure appeared again on the horizon, vast and incomprehensible. Its form was like nothing I could describe, an amalgamation of shadow and tendrils, constantly shifting and leaking green light that spread like roots. "What are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure's tendrils stretched toward me, curling around the edges of my vision. "I am Ngurath, the Dreaming Blight. I offer renewal." "Renewal?" I echoed, choking on the word. "Your world is stagnant," Ngurath whispered, "bound by the veil, but I can change it. I can make it whole." The tendrils grew closer, their light washing over me, and I felt my skin burn as green veins crawled up my arms. I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the hum. I woke drenched in sweat, my arms aching as though the veins from the dream had followed me into reality. Darren was in the kitchen, his eyes darting between his phone and a notebook filled with frantic scribbles. "Anything new?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He nodded, his face pale. "There are reports from all over. Weird stuff. People acting strange, green light in the cracks of buildings, animals disappearing." "Disappearances?" "Yeah," he said, flipping to another page. "Whole herds of livestock just gone. No signs of struggle, just green scorch marks where they were. I sank into the chair across from him, my mind racing. This isn't random, it's connected. To what? The dreams, I said, the veins, all of it. There's something breaking through. It calls itself Engurath. Darren stared at me, his pen frozen mid-scribble. Engurath? What the hell is that? I hesitated, my stomach twisting. Something old, something powerful, and it's using the cracks to spread. Later that day, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the faint green veins running along my arms. They pulsed in time with the hum that had become a constant presence. I reached for the edge of the mirror, half expecting it to ripple like water, but it stayed solid. My reflection, however, didn't. It shifted subtly at first, then violently, the edges of my face warping and distorting. My eyes in the reflection began to glow faintly green, the veins in the image spreading faster than they were on my actual skin. "You're part of it now," the reflection said, though my lips didn't move. I stumbled back, my chest heaving. "You're becoming—" I needed answers. Darren and I dug through every source we could find, mythology books, online forums, even conspiracy sites. But nothing explained what was happening until Darren stumbled upon a single reference in a text about creation myths. And through the cracks of the veil, the blight shall seep, reshaping what it touches, remaking it in its image. My blood ran cold. "The blight, that's it, that's Engurath." Darren frowned. "This book talks about a veil too. Something that separates reality from something else." I nodded slowly. "The cracks are in the veil. That's how it's getting through." "But why you?" Darren asked. "Why your dreams? Your apartment? What makes you different?" I didn't have an answer. I stood at my window staring at the skyline. The veins had grown more pronounced overnight, their faint green glow now creeping up the sides of buildings and weaving through the cracks in the streets below. They weren't confined to my apartment anymore. They were everywhere. Darren was pacing behind me, his movements quick and jerky. "This isn't localized. If the reports are true, this thing, whatever it is spreading faster than we thought." I nodded, watching as a man on the sidewalk stopped mid-step. He turned his head sharply, his movements unnatural, and stared up at my window. His eyes glowed faintly green, the veins around them pulsing in rhythm with the hum I couldn't escape. "It's in them now," the voice whispered in my mind. "It's in all of you." I turned away from the window, my chest tight. The knock at the door came suddenly, sharp and deliberate. Darren froze, his eyes darting toward the sound. "Don't answer it," he said quickly, his voice low. But something about the knock felt different. It wasn't like Mrs. Connors or the others who had already succumbed to the blight. It was purposeful, almost familiar. Against Darren's protests, I moved to the door, gripping the handle tightly before pulling it open. Standing in the hallway was a stranger. Or at least that's what I thought at first. Their face was shadowed by a hood, but when they looked up, I recognized them immediately. "Alex?" They nodded, their expression grim. We sat in the kitchen, Darren watching Alex with a mix of suspicion and disbelief. Alex looked tired. Their face was pale, their eyes sunken, and when they rolled up their sleeve, I saw faint green veins crawling up their arm. "It's worse than I thought," Alex said, their voice low and hoarse. "You know what this is?" I asked, my words rushing out. Alex nodded. "It's Engurath, the Dreaming Blight. It's been waiting for an opportunity, and the cracks in the veil gave it one." "The veil?" Darren asked, his brow furrowing. Alex glanced at him, their gaze heavy. "The barrier between our reality and everything else. It's failing. That's how Engurath's corruption is spreading." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "And the dreams? The veins?" Alex looked at me, their expression softening. You've been touched by it. The closer it gets, the more it tries to reshape you. Reshape me. It doesn't destroy, Alex said. It remakes. Everything it touches becomes part of its vision, a new creation, in its image. Alex reached into their bag and pulled out a small, jagged object. It looked like black glass, but when they turned it in the light, I saw faint golden threads running through it, pulsing faintly. "This is a fragment of the veil," they said. "It's one of the only things that can slow the corruption, but it's not a cure. It won't stop Aingurath." "Then what's the point?" Darren asked, his voice sharp. Alex met his gaze. "The point is survival. If we can use this to stabilize the cracks, we buy time to figure out how to stop it for good." I reached for the fragment, but Alex pulled it back. "Using this isn't easy. It requires sacrifice. And the more you use it, the closer you get to the thing you're trying to stop." Their eyes flicked to the veins on their arm, their meaning clear. As Alex spoke, the hum in the room grew louder, and the air seemed to thicken. I felt it before I saw it, the rift opening in the corner of the room. It was small, no larger than a doorway, but its edges pulsed with green light, and shadowy tendrils began to spill through, curling toward us. Alex stood quickly, the fragment glowing faintly in their hand. "They're here," they said, their voice steady but tense. "You need to decide now. Are you willing to fight this, or do you let it take you?" The tendrils reached for me, and the hum grew deafening. I clutched the table, my chest tight as the whispers rose, layered and endless. "Let go," they said. "Let us remake you." I closed my eyes, the voices crashing over me like waves. And then Alex's voice cut through, sharp and commanding. "Jade, the choice is yours. Fight it or fall." The rift in the corner pulsed, its jagged edges spilling shadowy tendrils that writhed like living things. Green light glowed faintly along the edges, illuminating the room in sickly flashes. The hum was louder now, vibrating through my chest, drowning out my thoughts. Alex stood between me and the rift, the fragment of the veil glowing faintly in their hand. Their face was pale, their movements stiff, but their voice was steady. "Jade, listen to me," they said. "This is what Aingurath does. It spreads, little by little, until there's nothing left but its creation." "What do we do?" Darren asked, his voice trembling as he pressed himself against the far wall. Alex's gaze flicked to me, their expression grim. "You have to fight it." The tendrils stretched toward me, curling and twisting, their movements slow but deliberate. I felt their pull, not just physically but mentally, a weight pressing against my thoughts, softening the edges of my resistance. "You are part of this," the voice whispered, threading through the hum. "You see it, you feel it, let it grow." The veins on my arms burned, their glow intensifying as the tendrils drew closer. I clutched my head, my breathing shallow as the voice grew louder, insistent. "Let go," it said. "Let us remake you." "Jade!" Alex's voice cut through the noise, sharp and urgent. I looked at them, their hand extended toward me, the veil fragment pulsing faintly in their grip. "This is what it wants," they said. "To break you, to make you part of it." "I don't know if I can stop it," I shouted, the weight of the tendrils pressing harder against my mind. "You don't have to stop it alone," Alex said, stepping closer. "But you have to choose to fight. That's the first step." The tendrils were inches away now, their green light spilling across my skin. The hum had become deafening, the whispers layered and endless, promising release, renewal, transformation. I looked at the fragment in Alex's hand, its glow steady and resolute, and reached for it. The moment my fingers touched it, a searing heat shot through my arm, spreading like fire. The fragment's golden light flared, blinding, and I felt the tendrils recoil, their grip loosening. But the light wasn't just driving the tendrils back, it was digging into me too. I felt it pressing into my chest, my mind burning through the parts of me that had already been touched by the blight. The pain was excruciating, but the tendrils began to retreat, the rift shrinking as the fragment's light grew brighter. "You're stronger than you think," Alex said, their voice steady despite the strain on their face. When the rift finally closed, the hum faded into silence, leaving the room heavy with stillness. The veins on the walls pulsed faintly, their glow dimmed but not extinguished. I collapsed to the floor, clutching my arm where the fragment's heat still lingered. The veins beneath my skin had stopped glowing, but I could feel them still, dormant, waiting. Alex knelt beside me, their face pale but calm. "That was just the beginning," they said. "The cracks are spreading faster than I thought. And Ngurth, it's not going to stop." Darren leaned against the wall, his face pale, his hands shaking. "How do we stop something like this?" Alex stood slowly, the fragment dim in their hand. "We find the other fragments, and we hold the veil together for as long as we can." As the room fell silent, I heard it again, faint, distant, but unmistakable. "You can't hold it forever." The voice was softer now, almost amused, but its weight still pressed against my chest. I looked at Alex, their expression grim, and realized they'd heard it too. The streets felt quieter than they should have been. The faint hum that had filled the air since the blight began was louder now, its rhythm constant, like a heartbeat threaded through reality. Everywhere I looked, the green veins had spread further, trailing up lampposts, weaving through cracks in the pavement, and curling around the edges of buildings. But it wasn't just the veins. People had changed. A man stood motionless in a shop window, his head tilted slightly as he whispered to his reflection. A woman on the corner rocked back and forth, her eyes glowing faintly green as she hummed a low, dissonant tune. "They're already part of it," Alex said, walking beside me. Their voice was steady, but there was a tension in their jaw, a tightness in their movements. "Can we save them?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Alex didn't answer. Darren trailed behind us, clutching a hastily packed bag of supplies. He hadn't said much since the first rift closed, his usual energy replaced by a quiet unease. "How do we even know where to look for the next fragment?" he asked finally, breaking the silence. Alex pulled a small, leather-bound notebook from their bag, flipping through pages filled with cryptic symbols and hastily drawn maps. "The fragments resonate with the veil," Alex explained. "When one's close, you'll feel it, like a pressure in the air or a shift in the hum." I frowned. "So what? We just wander until we stumble into one?" "Not exactly," Alex said, stopping in front of a dilapidated building. Its windows were cracked, green veins crawling up its walls like ivy. "The blight spreads faster near a fragment. If the corruption here is this bad, there's a good chance one is nearby." The building's interior was worse than I expected. The air was thick, oppressive, and the walls pulsed faintly with green light. Tendrils snaked across the floor, curling away as we stepped inside, as though they were alive. Darren stayed close to me, his eyes darting to every shadow. Alex moved ahead, their movements deliberate, the fragment from their bag glowing faintly in their hand. "It's close," Alex said, their voice low. I felt it too, a weight in the air pressing against my chest. My veins began to burn faintly, the hum growing louder as we moved deeper into the building. And then I saw it. The fragment was embedded in the center of the floor, surrounded by a network of glowing green veins that pulsed in time with the hum. It looked like the one Alex carried, dark, jagged, and threaded with faint golden light, but it was larger, more imposing. "Do you feel it?" the whisper said, curling through my mind. This is how it grows. This is how you grow. Before I could step closer, the veins around the fragment began to shift, pulling together into a shape. The green light grew brighter, coalescing into a towering figure of shadow and tendrils, its form barely holding together as it loomed over us. "You shouldn't be here!" it said, its voice layered and fractured like 1,000 whispers speaking at once. "Move back!" Alex shouted, holding their fragment in front of them. The Guardian didn't flinch. Its tendrils lashed out, slamming into the ground near Alex's feet, sending a shockwave through the floor that knocked me back. "It's protecting the fragment," Alex said, helping me to my feet. "It won't let us take it without a fight." Darren pulled a crowbar from his bag, gripping it tightly. "A fight? Against that thing? Are you kidding me?" "We don't have a choice," Alex said, their voice grim. The air grew heavy as the Guardian advanced, its tendrils reaching for us. Alex's fragment flared brightly, its golden light pushing the creature back momentarily, but the veins around the room began to shift, pulling toward the Guardian like reinforcements. "Jade!" Alex shouted. "You can feel the fragment! Use it!" I didn't know what they meant, but I moved closer to the fragment, the hum growing louder with every step. The burning in my veins intensified, but I pushed through it, reaching out for the shard embedded in the floor. The moment my fingers touched it, the world seemed to collapse inward. I was no longer in the warehouse. I stood on the black, rippling expanse again, the void stretching endlessly around me. Tendrils curled in the distance, and Ngurath's vast form loomed on the horizon, its glowing veins pulsating in rhythm with the fragment in my hand. "You see now," the voice said, resonating through the void. "The fragments are mine. They grow because I grow. You cannot stop it." The tendrils stretched toward me, their light washing over the darkness. I gripped the fragment tighter, feeling its heat burn into my palm. "You can hold it for now," the voice continued, "but you will become part of it." I gasped as I was pulled back into the warehouse, the fragment's light flaring in my hand. The Guardian recoiled, its tendrils dissolving into the air as the veins around it began to retreat. Alex rushed forward, pulling me back as the fragment's glow dimmed, its golden threads fading into faint embers. "You did it!" Alex said, their voice tense. I looked at the fragment in my hand, its surface now cool and inert. The veins around the room had stopped moving, but I could still feel them, alive, waiting. "This is just the beginning," the whisper said, faint but insistent. The air in the warehouse was heavy with silence. The green veins that had once pulsed with malevolent life now lay dormant, their glow faded to faint, flickering embers. The fragment in my hand felt heavier than it should have, its dark surface cooling, though its faint golden threads still pulsed weakly. Alex leaned against a wall, their breathing ragged, the veins on their arm glowing faintly under their skin. Darren stood a few feet away, staring at the place where the Guardian had dissolved, his face pale and drawn. "What was that thing?" Darren asked finally, his voice trembling. "A fragment's Guardian," Alex said, their tone grim. "It was born from the Blight, a piece of Ngurath's essence tied to the shard. Wherever a fragment of the veil rests, the Blight anchors itself." "And the fragment?" I asked, holding it out. Alex straightened, their eyes dark and unreadable. "The fragment is part of the veil itself, a piece of the barrier that holds the Pantheon back. It can stabilize the cracks for a time." Darren crossed his arms. "And what's the cost this time? Because nothing about this feels like it's getting better." Alex hesitated, their gaze flicking to the veins on their arm. "The cost is always personal." We left the warehouse as soon as Alex deemed it safe, the fragment wrapped tightly in cloth and stored in Alex's bag. The streets outside were eerily quiet, though the veins on the buildings and streets had stopped glowing. But the hum hadn't disappeared. If anything, it was louder now, a low, persistent vibration that seemed to press against my mind. "Does it feel heavier to you?" I asked Alex as we walked. They nodded, their jaw tight. "The more fragments we gather, the more pressure builds on the veil. It's like patching a dam while the water keeps rising." I frowned. "So even if we find all the fragments, this doesn't stop?" Alex stopped walking and turned to me. "No, the fragments don't stop it. They only buy us time. If the veil falls completely, Ngurath won't just reshape this world. It will consume it." That night, as I lay awake in a motel room, the whisper returned. "You see it now," the voice said, curling through my thoughts. "The fragments are not yours. They are mine. They grow because I will it." I sat up, clutching my arms where the veins had begun to pulse faintly again. "Why are you doing this?" I asked aloud, my voice shaking. The hum deepened, the whisper growing louder. "Your world is broken, stagnant. I bring change. I bring renewal." "This isn't renewal," I snapped. "This is destruction." "All creation begins with destruction," the voice replied, calm and unyielding. "You will see. You will become." The next morning, Alex gathered Darren and me in the motel's dimly lit lounge. The fragment sat on the table between us, its faint glow casting long shadows across the room. "You need to know the truth about the fragments," Alex said, their tone heavy. "You mean there's more you haven't told us?" Darren asked, his frustration bubbling over. Alex ignored him and looked at me. "The veil wasn't built to last forever. It was a temporary solution, a way to contain the Pantheon and their influence until the Creator could find a permanent solution." I frowned. "But the Creator is gone." "Exactly," Alex said. "And without them, the veil has started to fail. The fragments are the last pieces of its strength, but they're also unstable." "What does that mean?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Alex leaned forward, their gaze intense. "It means every time we use a fragment, we weaken the veil's foundation. We're delaying the inevitable, but we're also making the cracks worse." Darren ran a hand through his hair, his voice tight. "So what's the point? Why are we even doing this?" "Because delaying is all we have," Alex said. "If the veil collapses completely, Ngurath won't just spread, it will unravel reality itself." As Alex spoke, the fragment on the table began to pulse brighter, its golden threads flaring with sudden intensity. The hum in the room deepened and the air grew heavy, oppressive. And then the room shifted. The light bent unnaturally, the edges of the walls rippling like water. The shadows grew deeper, darker, and a faint green glow seeped through the cracks in the floor. "They are watching!" Alex said, their voice steady but tense. "Who?" I asked, my chest tightening. Alex's eyes flicked to the fragment. "Ngurath. The more fragments we gather, the closer we come to it. And it knows." The next rift appeared 2 days later in an abandoned industrial park on the edge of town. The area had already been overtaken by the blight. Green veins snaked across the crumbling walls, and faint tendrils of shadow curled through the air. The hum was oppressive here, so loud it felt like a physical force pressing against my chest. Alex stopped in front of a rusted metal door, their hand resting on the fragment in their bag. Darren and I stood behind them, the weight of the moment heavy between us. "It's here," Alex said quietly. "The rift." "What's the plan?" Darren asked, gripping a crowbar like it could do anything against the things we'd seen. Alex didn't answer immediately. They looked at me instead, their expression unreadable. "Jade, you've felt it before. The fragment reacts to you in a way it doesn't to us. You'll need to lead this one." "What do you mean, lead?" I asked, my stomach twisting. Alex's gaze didn't waver. "You have to confront it directly. Ngurath is already inside you. That connection is both a curse and an opportunity. The moment we stepped into the building, the air shifted. The green veins along the walls pulsed with life, their light brightening as if responding to our presence. The hum grew louder, and the edges of my vision blurred, as though the world itself was unraveling. At the centre of the room was the rift, larger than the last one. Its jagged edges pulsed with green light, and shadowy tendrils spilled through, curling and twisting like they were searching for something. "You feel it," the whisper said, threading through my thoughts. "This is what you are!" I gripped the fragment in my hand, its surface hot to the touch. The golden threads within it flared faintly, pushing back against the tendrils, but the pressure in my mind was unbearable. "You cannot fight it forever," the voice continued, louder now. "You are already part of us." As I approached the rift, the world around me shifted again. The room seemed to ripple, its walls bending and twisting as the green veins spread faster. Darren's voice was distant, distorted, and Alex's words were lost entirely. I was standing on the black, rippling expanse again, the void stretching endlessly around me. Ngurath loomed on the horizon, its massive, shifting form pulsating with sickly green light. Its tendrils reached out in all directions, threading through the cracks in the void like roots burrowing into soil. "You see it now," the voice said, resonating through the darkness. "You cannot escape what you are becoming." I stumbled back, clutching the fragment tighter, but the tendrils were already upon me. They curled around my arms, my legs, pulling me closer to the massive form of Ngurath. "You will join us," the voice whispered, its tone soft and insistent. "You will become." The fragment in my hand flared brightly, its golden light cutting through the shadows. The tendrils recoiled, and the vision began to crack, the void splitting apart like shattered glass. I heard Alex's voice cutting through the hum, sharp and commanding. "Jade, focus on the fragment. Use it to close the rift." I forced myself to focus, clutching the fragment as its light grew brighter, the heat burning through my palm. The golden threads within it twisted and pulsed, weaving together like a lattice. The tendrils lashed out again, but the fragment's light held them back. Slowly the edges of the rift began to close, the green light dimming as the shadows retreated. When the rift finally sealed, the air in the room grew still. The veins on the walls stopped pulsing, their glow fading to faint embers. I collapsed to my knees, the fragment falling from my hand, its light now dim and flickering. Alex knelt beside me, their face pale but calm. "You did it," they said, but I didn't feel victorious. My hands were trembling, and the veins beneath my skin burned, their faint green glow returning. "You are becoming," the whisper said, faint but persistent. I looked at Alex, their expression heavy with understanding. "The more you fight it," they said softly, "the more it takes from you." We didn't stay in the industrial park. Alex insisted we keep moving, the fragment in their bag growing heavier with each passing hour. The hum in the air followed us, a constant reminder that the blight was still spreading. The motel we stopped at was quiet, too quiet. The green veins crept along the edges of the parking lot, their glow faint but unmistakable. Darren was pacing again, his nerves frayed. "You said the fragments buy us time," Darren said to Alex. "How much time are we talking? Days? Hours?" Alex didn't answer immediately. They sat at the edge of the bed, their head in their hands. "Not enough," they said finally. "And it's getting worse. There's a fragment nearby, stronger than the others. If we don't stabilize it, the rift it's creating could..." They didn't finish the sentence, but the weight of their silence was enough. That night, the whisper returned with a vengeance. "You're close," it said, curling through my mind like smoke. "You've seen the fragments. You've felt their power. But this one is mine." I clutched my head, the veins in my arms burning as the hum grew louder, drowning out Darren's voice as he tried to wake me. The motel room dissolved into darkness, and I was back on the rippling black expanse. Engurath loomed closer now, its form towering over me, its tendrils weaving through the cracks in the void. "You cannot fight it forever," the voice said, soft but insistent. "You are already part of this." I tried to speak, to resist, but the words caught in my throat. The tendrils stretched toward me, their light washing over my skin, and I felt something deep within me crack. Alex shook me awake, their hand gripping my shoulder tightly. "It's here," they said, their voice urgent. I sat up, my body trembling, the whisper still echoing in my mind. Darren was already by the door, his crowbar in hand, his face pale. We followed Alex out of the motel and into the night. The hum was deafening now, the green veins glowing brighter than I'd ever seen. They seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat, stretching toward a derelict church at the end of the street. "The fragments inside," Alex said, their gaze fixed on the crumbling building. As we approached, the air grew heavier, the shadows deeper. The rift was visible even from outside, a jagged tear in the fabric of reality spilling green light and tendrils of shadow. The moment we stepped inside, the temperature dropped, and the shadows came alive. The veins along the walls pulsed violently, their glow spreading outward as the rift at the centre of the church widened. The fragment was embedded in the altar, its golden threads barely visible beneath the pulsing green light that surrounded it, and in front of it stood the Guardian. It was larger than the one in the warehouse, its form more defined. Its tendrils were thick and serpentine, writhing like they had minds of their own. Its face, or what passed for one, was a shifting mass of light and shadow, with two glowing green orbs that seemed to pierce through me. "You cannot take it," the Guardian said, its voice fractured and layered. "It is part of the whole. You are part of the whole." Alex stepped forward, their fragment glowing brightly in their hand. The Guardian recoiled slightly, its tendrils lashing out but stopping short of Alex's light. "Jade," Alex said, glancing back at me, "you're the only one who can reach the fragment. You have to connect with it." "I can't," I said, my voice trembling. "You saw what happened last time. It's inside me now." "That's why you have to," Alex said firmly. "It's already chosen you. If you don't, it will take everything." The Guardian surged forward, its tendrils slamming into the ground and sending shockwaves through the floor. Darren was thrown back, his crowbar clattering to the side as he hit the wall. I clutched the fragment Alex had given me, its light flaring in response to the Guardian's advance. My veins burned as the hum grew louder, the whisper pressing against my thoughts. "Take it," the whisper said. "Become." I ran toward the altar, the Guardian's tendrils snapping at my heels. The fragment embedded in the stone pulsed violently, its light blinding as I reached for it. The moment my hand touched it, the world shattered. I was back in the void, but this time I wasn't standing on the rippling expanse. I was floating, suspended in the darkness, with Engurath's form looming impossibly close. "You see now," the voice said, its tone triumphant. "You are part of this. You cannot resist what you already are." The fragment in my hand flared, its golden threads weaving through the void, pushing back against the tendrils that reached for me. But the more I fought, the more I felt the pull of Engurath's presence, its vast, incomprehensible will pressing against my mind. When I came to, the rift was gone. The fragment in my hand had dimmed, its golden threads flickering faintly. The Guardian had dissolved, its form scattered into shadows that faded into the walls. Alex helped me to my feet, their expression grim. "You closed it," they said, "but you're carrying more of it now." I looked down at my arms where the veins glowed faintly beneath my skin. The hum was quieter, but it was still there, a constant reminder of what I'd touched. "You are becoming," the whisper said, faint but unrelenting. I looked at Alex, my chest tight. "What happens when I can't fight it anymore?" Alex's face was pale, their voice soft. "Then we all fall." I didn't sleep after the core fragment. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the void, Ngurath's massive form looming over me, its tendrils weaving through my thoughts. The whispers were louder now, constant, their weight pressing against my mind like a tidal wave. "You are becoming," they said. "You cannot escape what you already are." The veins on my arms burned faintly, their green glow growing stronger each time I touched the fragment Alex had given me. Darren noticed first. "You're changing," he said, his voice low as we sat in the motel room. "Jade, look at yourself." I looked at my reflection in the cracked mirror. My skin was pale, my eyes sunken, and the faint glow of the veins beneath my skin was impossible to ignore. "I can still fight it," I said, though I didn't believe the words. Alex stood in the corner, their face shadowed. "For now," they said, "but every time you connect with a fragment, you let Ngurath in a little more. It's watching you, waiting for you to break." That night, the whisper grew stronger. "Do you see it?" the voice said, curling through my thoughts. "The cracks in your reality, the truths you've been denied." I clutched my head, trying to block out the sound, but the hum in the room only grew louder. "The veil is dying," the voice continued, "and when it falls, you will see what you were always meant to be." I felt the weight of its words pressing against my chest, the tendrils of the blight curling around the edges of my mind. "You can resist for now," it said, almost amused, "but you are already mine." The next day we found the rift, or rather, it found us. We were driving toward the outskirts of town where Alex said the last fragment would likely be. The veins along the roads were thicker now, their glow more intense, and the hum in the air was deafening. When the rift appeared, it tore through the sky itself. It was massive, a jagged wound stretching across the horizon, spilling green light and shadowy tendrils into the atmosphere. The ground trembled beneath us, and the air grew so heavy it felt like we were being crushed. Alex slammed the brakes, their hands gripping the wheel tightly. "This is it," they said, their voice tight. "The final fragment." Darren stared at the rift, his face pale. "How do we even get near that?" "We don't have a choice," Alex said, grabbing their fragment from the bag. As we approached the rift, the world around us began to change. The shadows stretched unnaturally, curling and twisting like living things. The green veins pulsed violently, their light bright enough to cast jagged shadows across the cracked pavement. And then the people appeared. They weren't like the Guardians we'd seen before. These were ordinary people, neighbours, strangers, each of them overtaken by the blight. Their skin was laced with glowing veins, their eyes blank orbs of green light, and they moved in a unison, their footsteps heavy and deliberate. "They're protecting it," Alex said, their voice grim. "Protecting it?" Darren echoed. "How the hell are we supposed to get through that?" Alex turned to me, their gaze heavy. "Jade, it's you. The fragment responds to you. You're the only one who can close this." The rift was unbearable up close. Its edges shimmered with green light, and the hum had become a roar, vibrating through my entire body. The fragment in my hand flared, its golden threads weaving through the air as I stepped closer. The people surrounding the rift turned to me, their glowing eyes fixed on mine. "You cannot stop this," the whisper said, louder than ever. "You are part of it. Let it happen." I stumbled, the fragment burning against my palm. The veins on my arms flared brightly, their light matching the rift's pulse. "Take it," the voice said. "Become." The world dissolved again, and I was back in the void. This time Engurath was closer than ever, its massive, shifting form towering over me. Its tendrils stretched toward the rift, weaving through the cracks in the void, pulling it apart piece by piece. "You see now," the voice said, resonating through the darkness. "You cannot fight what you are. The veil is falling. The only question is whether you will fall with it." The fragment in my hand flared, its golden light cutting through the void. I screamed, pushing back against the tendrils, forcing the light to weave through the cracks. "You will join us," Engurath said, its voice almost soft. "You will see the truth." When I came back to myself, I was standing in front of the rift, the fragment's light blinding as it burned through my veins. The people surrounding the rift had stopped moving, their forms frozen as the golden light spread through the air. The rift began to close, its jagged edges knitting together, the green light dimming. But as the rift shrank, I felt something inside me break. The fragment's light burned brighter, and I screamed as the veins on my arms flared, their glow spreading across my body. "You are becoming," the whisper said, faint but triumphant. When the rift was gone, the world was silent. The people who had been overtaken by the blight lay motionless on the ground, their glowing veins fading into nothing. I collapsed, the fragment falling from my hand, its light extinguished. Alex knelt beside me, their face pale, their hands trembling. "You did it," they said, their voice hollow. I looked at my arms, now laced with green veins that pulsed faintly in time with the hum that still lingered in my mind. "What happens now?" I whispered. Alex didn't answer. The rift was gone, and with it the blight's immediate presence. The veins that had crept across the town were fading, their green glow dimming to faint scars etched into the walls and streets. The hum had quieted, no longer an oppressive roar, but a faint vibration I could still feel in the back of my mind. Darren and I stood outside the crumbling church, the sky above us cracked but still intact. The fractures glowed faintly, jagged lines of golden and green light cutting through the clouds. "It's not over, is it?" Darren asked, his voice heavy. I didn't answer. The veins beneath my skin still pulsed faintly, their glow barely visible in the dim light. Alex sat on the steps of the church, their face pale, their shoulders slumped. The fragment they carried was dark now, its golden threads extinguished. "You bought us time," they said, their voice quiet. "For how long?" I asked. Alex shook their head. "Not long enough. The veil is still breaking, Engurath is still watching. And every time we stop a rift, it takes a little more from you." I looked at my arms, the veins that marked me as something no longer entirely human. The hum in my mind grew louder for a moment, and the whisper returned. "You are becoming," it said, soft and insistent. "This is only the beginning." I closed my eyes, the weight of its words pressing against me. The cracks in the sky were still there, visible for anyone who cared to look. News outlets speculated endlessly, their theories ranging from atmospheric phenomena to government experiments. The people who had been touched by the blight didn't speak about what they'd seen. Some of them didn't speak at all anymore. The world moved on, but the cracks were a constant reminder. As we prepared to leave, Alex pulled me aside, their gaze heavy. "Jade, listen to me," they said. "The blight isn't gone. It's inside you now more than ever. It's waiting for the veil to weaken again. I nodded, my chest tight. What happens if I can't stop it next time? Alex's expression darkened. Then we all fall. That night I sat alone in the motel room, staring at the fragment on the table. It was cold and lifeless now, but its weight still pressed against me. The veins on my arms glowed faintly, and the hum in my mind never stopped. You are part of this, the whisper said, curling through my thoughts. You cannot escape what you are. I didn't know how much longer I could fight it. The blight was inside me, spreading with every moment, waiting for me to break. But for now, the rifts were closed, the light held, and I would hold too.